Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Paul. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Herts Valleys CCG board meeting in public. I have a number of apologies for today's meeting. Nicholas Small, Diane Kirbishley, Karina Chibanu, and Thelma Stober. Interest to declare. I think we have all declared where necessary interest, just GPs as far as the ECF is concerned later on, but I think we are just making a decision to give somebody else the right to make that decision, so we're only talking about it. Minutes of the meeting held jointly with West Herts Trust on the 6th of June. I'll just run through those minutes for any errors or omissions. Just on page 1, there is an error under Laura Abel's title. She's a bit ahead of the game there, I think. What should it be, Laura?
No, it's I put both myself and David under West Herts Hospitals Trust, and that should actually say Herts Valleys CCG. So,
for those of you who know, she's a bit ahead of the game today. Right, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9. All correct, so we can sign those off as correct. Thank you. Matters arising. We have none, they're all completed, so fine, thank you for that. Okay, let's move on to item number 5, which is the Board Assurance Framework.
That's me.
Oh, Rod, over to you.
I think it's got Katie on the agenda, but it is me. I think the report last month was slightly shorter than usual because we hadn't actually gone through the entire review process. So this is a full report with a number of recommendations. I'll assume that people have read the paper, so I won't go through it in detail, but just to pick out one or two highlights. 2.6 risk is around GDPR, and just to say that I think as an organisation we've done pretty well to implement GDPR, and all of our staff have been trained, and some of the teething problems we had initially, we still get them, but we've managed to get through that, and people have good awareness. So the forecast and target scores for that one have been reduced to 4. 3.2b I think was discussed at the last board meeting. This is around practice capacity to deliver transformation. We're recommending a reduction in score from 16 to 12. I believe that was discussed at both Primary Care Commissioning Committee and Commissioning Executive. Not sure if it was today because I wasn't there. So that's a recommendation on that. 3.4 is a relatively new risk around the mobilisation of community services, and that risk score we're proposing a reduction to 12 because of good progress and things being on track. And then finally 3.5, which is the prevention and health inequalities risk. We're recommending a risk score reduction to 8. So I wasn't really going to say any more than that, Chair, but happy to take comments and questions.
Questions for Rod?
The only other thing that I think we've discussed most recently, bearing in mind we're starting to get a very consistent set of results, is around the DTOC target, which actually sits in the risk register, which is rather than the BAF itself. Or I should say reduction in the, we're actually achieving a sustainable reduction in the target, which is 3.5%, but actually in our BAF target, I think we were suggesting that we actually go back round that and reduce that score in light of the sustained position as a result of the Performance Committee discussions. But we can present that next time we come. But other than all, there's a ZEX, we've gone through it with the whole of the organisation to do an end-to-end review for this financial year.
Just as a suggestion, I know that we now go through these risks in each of the committees. They're allocated to appropriate committees. We have a deep dive planned of one of the risks at the next audit committee, and out of that I would like to hope that we can give some clearer guidance to the individual committees on perhaps what they might look at when they're considering the risks. in terms of sort of challenging the definitions of the risk, the major controls that have been put in place, the sort of assurance that they should be looking for when they're going through it. So I would suggest that that's one of the outputs that we might then share with the other committees, to say you haven't just got these just to admire, they're there to do that. I mean, because it is, sometimes I think we do look at them and go, not quite sure what we do with that. So I think that'll be helpful guidance probably.
So I slightly disagree, having sit in all the committees, that actually we do use them as interactive, so that we do start off discussing them and actually we always come back to them, particularly in, I know committee, you're not necessarily there for those, but ComExec, Primary Care Committee, Quality Committee, we go through them and say, do we want to amend them after the result of the discussion in the meeting? So I obviously always do think there's a way we can improve following the Audit Commission discussion, but I don't believe that we don't treat it in that way in each of the committees.
And really, I'm just suggesting that there might be some additional structure we can put around the discussions that make sure that the sort of the key subject head, the key areas get picked up in the meetings as well as the discussions that take place.
Yeah, and at the last board we talked about making sure that all the papers refer back to the BAFRIS, which we have implemented as well. So yeah, I think as all these things are continued learning curve, but we should also recognise our strategic risk management we've seen as an exemplar from our internal audit.
Yes. Okay, any other questions for Rod on that? Or are we happy to approve that? Okay, nods around. Thank you very much. Okay, you arrived just in time, Helen. Good afternoon. Okay, we now move on to item 6. You've all received the papers, the pack with the SOC detail in it. Those papers also include the Equalities Impact Assessment Report, Quality Impact Assessment Report, second one, the Equalities Impact Report and the Qualities Impact Assessment Report, Public and Stakeholder Engagement Report, including frequently asked questions, and submissions from the public and stakeholders for board consideration. This afternoon, the Herts Valleys Board is being asked to review the Trust SOC and accompanying papers, consider the decision of the West Herts Board, and if the proposal is to submit option 1 as part of the SOC, whether to support as a commissioner the decision by West Herts Board, or if the decision of West Herts Board is not to submit option 1, to determine our next steps. So David, I think you're coming in first.
We should just introduce Mike and Helen.
Oh, sorry, okay. Can I introduce Helen Brown from West Herts Trust, and Mike van der Voort, who is also here representing the Trust, and we'll have their say in a few minutes. David, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I don't expect to take everybody through the entire SOC. There's numerous documents with numerous pages of detail, but we've had conversations throughout the year, and they've culminated in debates at Commissioning Executive, boards in public, and also the board in public with West Herts and Herts Valleys CCG. So in essence, I'm going to walk you through a little bit now of the history. We'll find out from Helen the decision that was made this morning at West Herts Hospital Trust Board, and Juliet will talk through the engagement process and feedback that we've had from the local population. Then we'd like to get into a discussion about detail within the SOC so that colleagues around the table can ask questions, and hopefully between us we can all answer them and give assurances based on the information provided. So if I step back a little bit and walk you through some of the history, this has been a long journey that the CCG has been on in partnership with West Herts Hospital Trust, even pre-CCG. Goes back to 2003 and further with investing in your mental health, also investing in your health, into 2007 to 2009, which is delivering quality healthcare for Hertfordshire, throughout Your Care, Your Future, and last year, in 2017, we presented a strategic outline case to the board, which was approved during the summertime. Since then, we've had conversations with regulators, and the world and climate has changed nationally and locally, and we've had to reframe some of the work in which we've done jointly with West Herts around the SOC, and some of that's around financial constraints and the ability for the NHS to respond to capital requests nationally, and about how we might therefore use other resources that we have been potentially on offer for us to get the best healthcare services we can and design the hospital provision to accommodate to that. We know that there's been various options that we've talked to, from long list to short list, and the board will be aware of the debate and the process in which we've got to those decisions. And today we're now discussing what will be West Herts Hospital Trust's preferred option that we can then take a view on. So before we go into any further detail, I'm probably going to ask Helen just to respond to what happened this morning and give the board a sense of the decision made by West Herts.
Okay, so yes, I can confirm that our board met this morning. The SOC was approved, including option 1 as the preferred way forward. Obviously, we had a full debate, but we'll pick that up in questions and answers.
Thank you, Helen. So confirmation that option 1 now formally from West Herts Hospital Trust Board is their preferred way forward, which will move to, well, they would like to move to OBC, outline business case. We do know, just to flesh out option 1 and remind you of those criteria, that option is the option of the 3-site model that continues development predominantly within Watford Hospital and provides development also, though, in St Albans and Hemel Hempstead. And they vary depending on the scales of development and decisions that we've made. Now, we always recognise that option 1 was strong focus on emergency care, and that we would be investing money around emergency care, the women's and children's unit infrastructure, and improving the overall infrastructure of the site. We also know that in St Albans there would be improvements around planned care and how we would develop the planned care offer for St Albans City Hospital, and it would take on more surgical procedures than it currently does now. At Hemel Hempstead, there will still be what we would say significant investment regarding Hemel Hempstead Hospital and the opportunities there, and that would involve £10 million within investments potentially around land sales, and another £10 million investment around additional money that's built into this strategic outline case. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, alongside the additional £10 million over the years that's been invested in primary care and the development of community services. So we also have been investing in Your Care, Your Future pathways, which will complement those hospital builds and extend some of those pathways that shift the activity out from the hospital into the community. And we always said that by 2024, we'd be looking to shift 40% of that activity. We're currently at around 10 to 15% of activity shift, so we're well into the plans that we already designed as part of the strategy that will fulfil some of the requirements of this configuration. So based on those plans, we know that we have, I think, taken into account some of the local requirements of individuals' healthcare. We've also looked at some of the population growths and how that will be built into the strategic outline case, and Helen and I can talk a bit more about that if asked later, because there's extensive planning that's taken place on all of the district councils and borough councils, so we need to factor that into the process. So what we think is that, given that option 1 has been recommended as the preferred way option now and decided upon within West Herts Hospital Trust, as a CCG, we need to, I guess, scrutinise that decision, have a debate now about how we progress in terms of our decision to support that option. I'm going to pass on to Juliet now, who's going to talk about the engagement process, because I think it's really important that we hear about people in the community that we've talked to, the population, and understand the feedback that we've received. So Juliet,
yeah, thank you. So board members will have seen the engagement report, which is part of the pack, and actually it is an important part of the decision making and of the documentation that you've seen. We do need board members to be aware of the views of the public and other stakeholders as they make their decision. So we engaged in a lengthy programme since last autumn, and it was a joint programme with the Trust, and in terms of the kind of groups who we spoke to, that includes people who live in West Hertfordshire primarily, their elected representatives such as the MPs and councillors, and clinicians. We used a range of methods, and there's quite a lot of detail about that in the report. We did have a number of public meetings, and actually there are people around this table, I think probably most of you have been to at least one of those public meetings. We had representation from members of the public at our own meetings, and we ourselves attended, along with Trust colleagues, council meetings. We also wrote letters to the media, we spoke to journalists, We engage in quite a lot of correspondence with some individuals and groups across the area, and we used our digital channels too, particularly our websites, to provide information. We also formed, and I think people will be aware of this, a stakeholder evaluation panel whose work was to support the qualitative analysis that was carried out, primarily around scoring the 4 shortlisted options. And that comprised, for example, we had patient reps, we had managers, we had clinicians, people from other partner organisations, Health Watch, and so on. So I think it's important to say that throughout this process, our aim has absolutely been to be as transparent as we could, as open as we could, and to share as much information as we could. And I think we also adapted to, as we went along, to what was going on and what people told us and what they wanted. So I think also it's worth just saying something about the feedback that we received. And I know that people have read the report and you'll get a flavour of what that was, but I just wanted to pick out a few key themes. And I think the first thing I would say is that there does remain a body of opinion, especially but not exclusively, by any means interquorum, that would still like us to develop a new hospital on a fresh site located somewhere central to the patch. It's a strongly held view. We all heard it in public meetings. We've seen it in the pack of submissions today, and we've had lots of correspondence with individuals since we launched the refresh. Excuse me. I think we've been clear in our conversations, and I think that it'll be a view, I think, that will be shared by the board, that we do understand the viewpoint, and you know, we get where people are coming from. I think the other thing is that we do know there are some people who support the development of the existing sites, and that does include staff from the trust. And I think a lot of that is based on people thinking that we do actually need to put something forward that is realistic, particularly given the steer that the trust and the CCG has had from regulators about funding constraints. In relation to shortlisted options, I think it's right to say that there has been support for option 4, and that's the one that comes with a new consolidated planned care centre. More, I think, in favour of option 1, primarily because it does actually deliver maximum benefit on the emergency site, because that's the site that sees the highest volume of patients and those with higher levels of acuity. So a mixed bag of views, and I think that we've all heard some of that over the last few months. Just perhaps to mention a few of the themes that have cropped up particularly. So finances have obviously been a key theme. We've had lots of conversations with people who wanted to know why we weren't bidding for more than the £350 million we've talked about. I think there's been an increased level of acceptance of that financial constraints in recent months. There are still those who think that we should be pressing for a higher level investment, and we understand that. Linked to that point, there have been challenges around how the team has costed the options. Some people suggesting that a new built hospital on a fresh site would cost considerably less than the estimates that have been suggested. Trust colleagues have explained the costing framework at public meetings and other meetings, and I think it's probably fair to say that there remains some disagreement about those issues. Other things that have cropped up in meetings, and I think also reflected in the submissions that have been sent in, accessibility, public transport to and between existing sites has been another continuing issue, together with the need to ensure that there is sufficient parking on hospital sites. Also, conversations around capacity. So members of the public have wanted to make sure that new plans do take into account increased needs and a growing population, and then how that fits into the wider environment of primary care and community service changes. A couple of points finally about, I suppose, the facilities and sites themselves. So the redevelopment of the facilities and buildings on the sites that are delivering services has also raised some questions about those who've been worried about patient safety, patient experience during the transition period. And then linked to that, I think there are people who've expressed some doubts about how a site with the extent of the problems that Watford General has could actually turn into a hospital with efficient modern facilities without doing a complete rebuild. So the engagement report does go into more detail about the feedback, and I think also it's worth just referring here to the frequently asked questions. It's also in the pack. That was published, and also the submissions, as I've mentioned, for this meeting and for the meeting held on the 6th of June. And I think that's me for the moment.
Okay, thank you, Juliet. Thank you for that comprehensive understanding of the public consultations that's been going on for some considerable time. I'm now going to ask for two representations from the public. Can I just remind you that you have been asked to keep those to 2 minutes in length, so I will stop you after 2 minutes. So, Peter Ingram, I believe you're going to do the first one, yes? 2 minutes is yours from the time you press the red button.
My name is Peter Ingram. I'm the chairman of West Herts Hospital, a volunteer West Herts community project. Our purpose is to support the development of a new centrally located NHS hospital for everyone in West Herts. Consequently, we represent all 4 localities. My wife and I have lived in the Watford and Three Rivers locality for 46 years. My 2 daughters and grandchildren also live in the Watford and Three Rivers, and Dr. Eliad is our doctor. So members of the board, we at Herts Valley Hospital truly sympathise with you in the imperfect decision you are being invited to make today. That is to approve a far from perfect plan for West Herts Hospital. We accept this inevitability, but we do so on the basis that you retain the opportunity in 6 to 9 months' time to upgrade to a much better solution. That opportunity will become available before work starts on the outline business case. You will, of course, need to be satisfied that there have been material changes to overcome the existing constraints. The top 3 constraints, in our opinion, preventing the best hospital option have been identified as inadequate funding, securing a suitable site, and achieving consensus among all stakeholders. Tackling these are our top priorities. We are aware, we've been made very aware, of the size of the funding gap to be bridged, and acknowledge that this is a huge challenge.
You got much more, Peter? Go on.
That challenge is accepted. Herts Valleys Hospital announces today that within the next 6 to 9 months we will provide you with a better viable choice, a centrally located hospital. We will do this by harnessing the latent enterprise, skills, passions and philanthropy of the West Herts community. In very practical terms, that means a major fundraising campaign. The next step is to commission a professional feasibility study on how best to raise the funds. We need to emphasise one key feature of our approach. Herts Valleys Hospital firmly intends to work positively and constructively with the CCG and the Hospital Trust. We hope to give you a progress report very shortly.
Thank you very much, Peter. Okay, Gillian Mullins.
My name is Gillian Mullins. I live in the Dacorum area, Hemel Hempstead. I was born there, as were my 2 daughters. Sadly, my 4 grandchildren were born in Watford, though they did receive excellent care. My question to the board is that we in Hemel Hempstead are having a lot of new building in our area. Ergo, our population is going to increase by quite a lot. So why are we only being allowed 10 million? Because we are an increasing area, a growing area. Should we issue people who come to live in our area a health warning? The other question also is that I do know that when people come to Watford to have babies, they probably embroider the truth so they get here in time, because they don't want to have their babies on the Hempstead Road in the back of a car. Other people have even decided to have home births because they don't want the journey to Watford. There is, of course, the ever-growing football club next door, and when our first grandchild was expected, we kept a close eye on the home games. So I'd like to hear some comments back on all of those points I've made, please.
Okay, thank you, Gillian. Okay. Okay. David, sorry, did you want to say something else?
So I'll take the demographic growth and the housing growth. So, and Helen, feel free to chip in if you need to. So the SOC does demand that we forecast using ONS statistics. So that's been factored into the process. But what we have done is had to keep that consistent with the STP medium-term financial plan. So there's a planning regime that we need to work towards. Office of National Statistics, apologies for the acronym. Therefore, and growth has been factored in over 20 years, so within that constraint. It uses the percentages of housing planning growth as well that are considered, and then we have to apply the reduction in, I guess, people going to the hospital. So that then gives you your final numbers of what you would then construct your hospital using. So with that in mind, we feel that there's enough in our broader plans of hospital prevention with individuals that are coming into the local area. They won't all be, there'll be a mixed demographics. There'll be young professionals coming in as well as elderly individuals who will use healthcare in different ways. So our view is that we think we've been prudent in our assumptions in ensuring that demographic growth alongside the housing plans are factored in. That's not to say it isn't a challenge when it comes to other parts of the community provision, but we think that that's it. And Helen, if you wanted to add anything.
So I can confirm that David's right in terms of how we've modelled future demand for hospital services. I think that there is a relatively high degree of population growth in Hertfordshire, and that is set out in the census. If all the housing is delivered as per the current housing targets, that may be an underestimate of the growth that we will see, and I think it is something that we are going to have to keep an eye on. The assurance that I gave to my board this morning on these questions was around a commitment to continuously review all of the assumptions that feed into the business cases. So at both outline business case and at full business case stage, we will check and refine assumptions and be keeping a very close eye on growth. I think the points that relate specifically to growth in particular geographic areas, the services the Trust provide obviously serve a broad population, broadly the south of the Herts Valley patch, with some patients travelling out of area to access care. And we need to take account of that growth. The very particular, more local growth, I think, is we need to make sure that we've got the primary community care infrastructure and the care closer to home models operating effectively to make sure that people only have to come to our hospitals when we're the right place, the best place to deliver care. But I think the key assurance is, we've got to keep this really closely under review to make sure we build the hospitals the right size.
Thank you, Helen. Catherine?
Yeah, so I think it's a very valid question actually, and we've had a lot of discussion about this, haven't we, at the public meetings, members of the public find it very difficult to triangulate what is only seen as an increasing pressure on NHS services and how we're going to future-proof for effectively 60 years our hospital within the affordable envelope that we have. And I agree with Helen. It's a difficult challenge, but I think we have responsibility to ensure that this. And another piece of feedback that was given to me is that this is about a hospital and bricks and mortar of a hospital, and we need to do a lot more, as we know, about the sustainability of the NHS in the way that primary and community care is delivered. We've made some changes on that so far in the last 18 months, but there is what predicates a lot of the scenarios that are in the SOC is also about how we manage demand collectively across our system. That's what the Sustainability and Transformation Plan is all about. That's what Your Future is all about. And there are some very extensive, challenging options in here in order to make this work that, as Helen suggests, we're going to have to really test carefully, certainly as we go through the next ABC stage and into the final business case stage, if we're successful in progressing to that position. And I think if we're successful in progressing to the final business case and the outline business case, which we're trying to achieve, then we're going to need to make sure we test those models really carefully in order to be able to scenario plan on the three options that are in the SOC. But I think we should also make note of that actually we're in the process of changing care now. These new models of care are absolutely at the forefront of our mind. And although we're here talking about hospitals, bricks and mortar, there's a lot of other things that we do collectively as organisations and system. So in our thinking as integrated care partnerships, we have a whole outpatients transformation plan. We have a whole urgent care strategy that we just launched in relation to a new front door at Watford around an urgent treatment centre. We could list a whole suite of other things that we're doing around to try and get into a position where we're thinking about and designing and implementing, therefore, a wholly different way in where we access care at the moment. And both the Trust and ourselves are absolutely focused on making sure that happens in line with our joint responsibilities in the sustainability of the STP plans and also our own Your Care, Your Future. So I think it's quite important that we don't just look at this document in isolation. And it is here in isolation because that's what we're here to discuss. But I just wanted to make sure we didn't go through this afternoon without reflecting back as particularly also as a commissioner and a system leader. We have a responsibility to make considerable changes in relation to primary care and community care, even before a spade would hit the ground in this scenario. So I think in the context of your question around how we're making sure that we can triangulate what is absolutely going to be significant investment in housing nationally, never mind just in Hertfordshire, that a part of our next step would be to not only make sure that we're making, again, significant progress collectively in the delivery of a new model of care, but that we do some really coherent and detailed work around those scenarios in the next stage.
Thank you, Catherine. And again, I would like to underline that as well, that whilst we are here discussing the SOC today, it is just a fundamental building block of improving the healthcare for the residents of West Hertfordshire. Right, I'm now going to open this up to the board for questioning.
We discussed where we want to be. I think it's probably quite important that we discuss why we can't stay where we are at present in terms of the effect it has on current patient care and looking forward. But also, as we move into the new development, I assume that there is work in the background in terms of pathways and care provisions that will alter to make it much more streamlined and much more efficient, so we get much better value from our current members of staff who are also in short supply. I think that's quite an important part of the package.
So the hospital's infrastructure at the moment does not lend itself to implementation of new digital methods of looking after patients. We went to Chase Farm yesterday, which is one of the first paper-free hospitals in England, and it was revolutionary to see the seamless transfer of patients from one area to the other, clinicians being able to get all the records up instantaneously, including images. You go into an outpatient room there's 3 computer screens, the presenting complaint and the GP's letter, the previous history, all the images available, all the pathology available, just with a swipe of a card. If you need to move to another room, you just seamlessly transfer across. When patients go from theatre back to the recovery room, the anaesthetic module, the monitor, follows them and it just clicks into the wall. So you don't have downtime. And the hospital is quiet. It's organised, it's controlled. Patients get called to see their doctor 10 minutes before they're due to be seen. They have their consultation, their name flashes up wherever they are in the hospital. By the way, you need to go and see Dr. Van der Walt now, your appointment's at 10 o'clock. They go along there. There's no packed waiting rooms. It's all beautifully organised. We can't do that within our current infrastructure. We have issues that because the hospital is too small for the size of the population we're serving, bits have been added on over the years. So, to give you an example, if you arrive in A&E and you've had a major car accident, it takes 20 minutes to get you from the A&E department up to the CT scanner so they can actually see what injuries you've sustained. You go to a modern hospital, the CT scanner is part of the A&E department. So, despite, the very high quality clinical force that we have within the trust, and we're beating national targets with regards to our outcomes and our stroke outcomes, our cardiac outcomes. We don't have a building that is fit for purpose and certainly doesn't allow us to progress the way we would want to.
Can I? So yes, we went to Chase Farm yesterday and we've all come back quite inspired, particularly about that integration of digital transformation with estate transformation, which I know is something that you're very interested in as well. I think just to dwell a bit on today, the state of our current infrastructure is really challenging for delivering good care. And this morning I reminded the board that particularly that challenge sits at the Watford General Hospital site. There are challenges at Hemel Hempstead, there are challenges at St Albans, but the biggest challenge in our current infrastructure is at Watford. So whether that's the current 6-bedded bays in PMOK, which are less than half the size that they should be, don't provide good privacy and dignity for patients or their visitors, but also make it very difficult for staff to provide good care. Whether it's the neonatal unit, also much smaller than it should be in terms of size, which inhibits clinical care around newborn babies. There is a long list of issues. That's about space constraints and design. Operationally, the infrastructure needs significant investment to improve it, whether that's the water, the ventilation, the windows. There's a whole set of issues that need to be addressed, and they do present daily challenges to maintaining good service delivery. And I know that our Chief Operating Officer this morning, and it's not unusual, is fighting on 3 fronts with 3 reasonably significant estates failures that are presenting challenges to maintaining service. So it is urgent and it is a real challenge to provide the care that we really want to provide at the moment.
Thank you.
I think just quickly, the other thing you asked us was, so we haven't touched on the money.
Yeah.
So one of the questions in your question was, well, will this help us deliver care that is more cost effective? And that will obviously benefit the population because there's only so many NHS pounds to go round. So we have looked very carefully at what we think the potential financial benefits that can be delivered through this investment. We've assessed that approximately £4 million worth of estate savings from rationalising and improving the sites, and approximately £19 million worth of operational service efficiencies from optimising clinical adjacencies, from getting our wards the right size to staff appropriately. We've got a list of about 14 opportunities that are set out in the SOC and have been benchmarked against model hospital to show where we think we've got significant opportunities to improve efficiency. We have to remember that that is offset by the cost of not exactly borrowing the capital but servicing the capital. We have to pay dividend payment and depreciation, and that is about £18 million a year. So if you do your quick sums there is a circa £5 million a year benefit to be realised that will support the trust to get to a better and more balanced financial position. It's more complicated than that, but that's the headlines.
Helen, I think Gillian talked about maternity, and I know when the sessions that we've done, this comes up. So I just wonder if we should just perhaps touch on what women do choose, the difference between maternity-led units and the importance of being next door to relevant consultant-delivered units. So I think this is an important point, and actually also the number of people where there is a scenario of traffic and how people do get through. So I know we hear it a lot in the meetings, so I think it'd be important for the board to hear that if we can. Yeah.
So I do understand that anxiety. I've had 3 children myself, and I know that kind of thought process, how will I get to hospital when I'm in labour, does play on your mind, and it is something that you take into account when you decide where you're going to have your baby. What my best understanding really is around patient choice is that most women would like to know that where they give birth, they've got the kind of full backup of clinical services if it's needed. And the complexity of need of women presenting is increasing over time to do with the age at which people are giving birth and to do with other complex conditions that they have. So an increasing proportion of our women do absolutely need to be on a site where there is full obstetric backup. For lower risk women, and I can also say this from experience, for lower risk women, home birth can be a very good option, and one thing it does do is take away that anxiety about getting to hospital. We were asked about this at one of the public meetings, or one of our engagement meetings was about, could you have a standalone midwifery-led unit so that women who don't want to give birth at home but don't want to travel into the hospital have that choice. It's not a piece of work that I did here, but I did a very large piece of work in North East London asking women about their choices. And essentially, people will largely either choose to give birth at home or want to be in a hospital setting, and it's a relatively small number of people who think a freestanding midwifery-led unit would work for them. They're quite expensive from a workforce point of view to run, and also from an estates point of view. And then the final point I make, and I see across the country now that people are finding it challenging to keep freestanding midwifery-led units running because the choice is more towards either home or full hospital model. The other issue is critical mass and the importance of having maternity services alongside your full set of acute hospital services. So if you are giving birth and you do, either the baby or the mother runs into difficulties, you need to have the full set of support behind you. And the kind of ideal size, we're delivering about 4,000 babies a year at the moment at Watford. Anything between 4,000 and 6,000 babies a year gives you a good critical mass to maintain all of the workforce you need. And you can't have obstetric-led units not on proper full emergency sites. So in terms of how people currently manage it, people do, they leave themselves a bit more time. They come to hospital a bit earlier than they might do if they live further away from the hospital. And I completely understand that. And that's a choice that we accommodate as best we can. And we provide support and advice through the triage service and over the phone. But if people want to come to the hospital because they're worried, then that's what they do.
Thank you, Helen. Alison. Yes.
Issues around passenger transport and travel to hospital more broadly. Juliet explored this a little bit in the themes of the submissions, but I was struck by one or two of the submissions which seemed broadly in support of developing at Watford, but remained concerned that if they had to rely on public transport, they would be relying on several different buses or complicated arrangements or heavy taxi fares. At Quality Committee, Stuart and I spend a lot of time talking about things like non-emergency passenger transport services and other volunteer services that help to bring... I'm just wondering if David could provide me with some kind of I don't know, not. I know you can't make promises, but some kind of assurance around the support we can offer to people reliant on public transport who struggle to get to hospital for their appointments.
So we already commission non-emergency patient transport, and that's obviously has the criteria that people who are unable to get to the hospital are able to book into. We know that we also link in with the voluntary sector in terms of some of their abilities to involve transporting people to their appointments and from appointments, and we do that closely with Herts County Council with our voluntary sector commissioning plans. We have throughout the process already met with all of the district and borough councils, and that regularly does come up as a talking point, and I think they are open to conversations that we would like to start having with them about how this happens. So it's kind of twofold. We have a conversation where the planning takes place at district, borough and county council. We have health planning, and what we're realising at the moment is the conversations we're having are coming closer because plans are now becoming realistic. So stuff around bus, where buses go and up, the actual routes that they take, the conversations around what the possibility of, a joint voluntary sector offer around transport that could be an opportunity, and some of the work we're doing with our non-emergency transport, again, as I reiterate, there are opportunities that need to coincide with this plan so that it all aligns and comes together at the same time. But I can assure the board that those conversations are taking place. We have them at Strategic Partnership Group, where Catherine and I sit with the directors of adult care, children's services and public health, and they're the kind of conversations we're having about future planning. So that's the kind of assurance that I can provide. And given that this is a long-term piece of work that will take place, what we'd like to do is make sure that this all aligns at the point of delivery, really.
Can I say two quick things? One, obviously we were a bit disappointed when the Metropolitan Line extension ran into difficulties, because that would have been a real asset for our patients. We haven't completely given up hope that at some point it might come back, but in the meantime I know that Watford Borough Council have been looking really closely at how they can improve transport links in the town centre, and some kind of discussions about what we're calling an Uber bus, and I think that I'm hoping that comes forward, and that should make a substantial improvement for people coming to the hospital by public transport. We want to have that dialogue, but we are going to need help to influence transport providers, because it's not straightforward. The other point, and not to labour the point, because I know that some people do have to come to hospital, and therefore we have to be addressing those issues, but we do bring people to hospital much more often than we probably need to. So a couple of quick examples. Diagnostics at St Albans. Putting MRI and CT at St Albans will mean that we can offer one-stop clinics. People will be able to come once to St Albans rather than multiple attendances to different sites. That will make an improvement for people. And another simple example, a conversation we're having at the moment with the CCG. We have too many people coming to hospital for blood tests, and really you don't want to drive to Watford, park, struggle your way into the outpatient department for a blood test that could be done in primary care. So we've got to get some of those. That's high volume, that's a lot of people, and it's not convenient. So some of those things, regardless of this, regardless of what option we do, we've got to keep working away and making it more patient-centred, and then finding digital is going to transform that as well.
Thank you.
Sorry, the very first point that was made about what Chase Farm was like when you visited it there, that sounded really exciting, but a real big step away from where Watford is. And looking at the submissions from members of the public, a huge concern seems to be about, and quite understandably, about how you can possibly transform the rather decrepit buildings that we have in Watford into that Chase Farm scenario that we would all dearly love. And the concerns are about things like patient safety, about stress, disruption, and fears about services getting worse during the meantime. And I think an awful lot of public reassurance is needed, if that's possible, about how on earth that could be achieved.
Okay, so two quick points. If we go with option one, approximately 50% of the facilities at Watford will be new build, and that does give us a substantial opportunity, and one of the reasons for going to Chase Farm was to get a sense of what is possible and how you need to design very carefully for the future. It is obviously more challenging working within existing buildings, but there are still things to learn from the way they've done it and the way they've integrated digital in. So that's the sort of, it will not be, and I think we've been upfront about this right from the start, this solution will not be as good as a full new hospital in terms of state-of-the-art design, compliance with all standards, but we do think we can get a really good solution. In terms of the disruption for patients through the process, and I do understand that's a concern. One, and I think we've showed plans before at the site, and Tim, who's in the audience, has done all of the detailed planning around this for how we would phase changes. There is quite a lot of space within the Watford site that gives us some advantages in terms of redeveloping on the site. The first thing we would do would build some new, and that then starts to free up. So we think the first thing that we need to do is a new ward block. We think we've got a good idea where that would go. We've thought through what the access routes to that would be, and we can achieve that with minimum disruption to the current operation of the hospital, partly thanks to the new link road. Once you've built new ward blocks, you can then start working through Princess Michael of Kent, but on a floor-by-floor basis, so you wouldn't have patients in the environment that you were renovating while you were renovating it, although they would still need to be in the building. So those are, we think that there is a feasible way to do this and minimise disruption. The other assurance that I gave again to our board this morning, and this is more detailed work that really gets done at outline business case and full business case stage, but there are a series of processes that you go through to mitigate risk, and things like noise abatement strategies, dust abatement strategies, all of those things, quite significant detail to manage that programme. And we do have a track record of having to deliver, actually in much more constrained environment at the moment, improvements to our buildings where we've got patients there. So we have done some of this, not at this scale, but we have done some of this, and other hospitals have done this, and we will learn from them in the way that we're learning from Chase Farm.
Continue to get those messages out to the public.
But again, I can't say there won't be any disruption, but there will be minimised.
So, I mean, firstly, I'd just like to say that I've had 2 interactions with Chase Farm as a patient in the last few months, and actually they weren't just putting on a show for you. I actually got in early both times, which was surprising. They haven't cracked car parking yet, mind you, which is, but you know, that I think that'll always be a problem. So I think there really are some. It is quite exciting model to move towards. I think Catherine talked about what the wider system needed to deliver, and the importance of that in support of what needs to happen in Watford as well. And looking at the dependencies, most of them in the paper itself in 2.6.3, you read through them and you think, yeah, that all looks reasonable. And the one that sort of struck me as the challenge that I haven't, and digital has come up as an important subject here, and it says realising optimal benefits will be dependent on the use of digital technology aimed at enable interoperability across primary, social care and secondary care. I mean, how, and I think this is probably, Catherine, Helen, good luck in answering it, but where are we in terms of, and when will do we have a vision or a plan as to how we're going to get that interoperability across all of those, including social care? Maybe that's the challenge for the STP, but so that was my first question. And whilst I've got the mic, my second observation really is we've got a 350 million envelope, so we've got to just spend it the best way we can, and that I think is kind of a given today, although I think everyone would like a new built hospital if we could afford it. But 350 million is what we get. I think there's a really thorough business case. There's tons of analysis in here. There's a lot of business modelling gone on, a lot of outputs, a lot of inputs. The assumptions are all defined. We've heard about adherence to the Treasury Green Book in terms of how a business case should be done, all good stuff, tick the book. There is now also a Treasury Aqua Book, which tells you about quality assurance of the business models. I would like to be sure that when we come back with the OBC, that we actually have applied those quality assurance of the actual business models themselves, so that we're assuring not only the inputs but also the outputs of the models, so that we know that we're making the right decision finally. I don't think it's going to change anything we do here, because it's the 350 million is kind of that elephant in the room, and it's about how you spend that clinically most efficiently. But so I think that going forward, I think Aquabook is a good read, and Don will enjoy it, I'm sure.
It's the first time I've heard mention of an Aquabook, but I will go and have a look for it. And yes, some of the Treasury guidance is changing about expectations about how we'll do the next stage of business case. So outline business case, looking much more at quantitative assessment of all benefits, not just financial benefits. So we'll need to make sure that we adhere to the guidance when we do the next piece of work. Absolutely, we will look at the Aquabook. The interoperability question, this is not my specialist subject. There is work underway at both STP level and locally. The MyCare Record programme to address. I think we have to be confident and put as much focus in solving those digital challenges as we put into solving the estates challenges, and they have to go hand in hand. I don't know, Catherine, whether you want to say more on interoperability.
No, it's just interoperability. I can. And I'm just Googled the Aquabook. You're right, it came out in 23rd of March 2015, so we will. Thank you, you did, you're right, yes. So clearly we, at all stages throughout this, and actually even at this stage, we've been liaising with the regulators and all the relevant bodies to ensure that we're absolutely following the right processes and the right guidance and the rules, and through various different checkpoints, in fairness. I would expect that to continue, and if the Aquabook is just as relevant, then that would play in. We do know, as Helen says, that there are changes coming through around the Green Book, but they've been really clear with us that we have to use existing rules at the moment and assumptions until otherwise published. So I just think that will continue, and that's part of the due diligence work that we do, which is extensive in getting even to this point, never mind in future points. Around interoperability, so we do have a summary care record that is already visible in the Trust. It is in a certain number of wards. It does sit in A&E, in the admissions units. It is a read only, not a write only, and ultimately we need it to be much more than just a summary care record. In fact, only this morning we were talking about A&E activity and making sure that information we're doing in primary care, with the clinical lead that sits in ED, who is here with our primary care team, making sure that actually they're able to see the work and the care plans that are happening in primary care around patients who've got the most need, who are coming into A&E. So there's much more that we need to do, and quite a lot of it at the moment is still manual. We accept that. But I do know that the Trust have spent, certainly over the last 6 to 9 months, quite a significant amount of investment in planning for your future IT. There are some major changes around, this is not the technical term, the pipework, the infrastructure and everything else that goes beneath it, which actually is probably more at the core of what we need, rather than necessarily the Chase Farm position. But without the core and the infrastructure, we're not going to be able to build some or all of the future technology. So there are a number of things that Trust are changing. They are multi-year programmes, and actually that base case is important before we build. However, at the same time, we should remember that there's also an opportunity to share it and integrate within primary and community care more so, and we've done a number of things over the last few years, but have recently, in the last 6 months, switched on for all practices where they can see community care records and vice versa, which we know is going down very well, and people are seeing the benefits of that. And similarly, we need to do more in relation to how we share data between social care. There's all the IG that goes through with that. There is an STP strategy and a whole programme of work around interoperability. It's fair to say that the systems are going to move at different paces depending on the pipework and infrastructure that we all have. But I don't think any of us are sitting here saying that we wouldn't want to make the best opportunity at any point in this journey, even before a spade is put in the ground in this, in order to be able to maximise interoperability solutions. And it goes even broader. A meeting we had last week was around care home interoperability. So there's loads of opportunities. It isn't just about hospital care. And we can do a significant amount as we are at the moment. It is dependent on investment, we know that, and capital investment that goes with that is just as equally constrained in that space as it is in bricks and mortar. So I honestly think that in line with our BAF and our strategic risk, we are on a journey here. We probably were nowhere near the pace that we'd like to go, but we are making progress.
Come on, Paul.
Can I make just one quick supplementary point? So we weren't at Chase Farm yesterday just because it's a near hospital. We were at Chase Farm because we're a partner with the Roll Free Group. The Roll Free are a global digital exemplar. They've gone live with the new model hospital version of Cerner at Chase Farm. We are hoping that we will get to be a GDE fast follower and really work with the Roll Free to learn everything from them. Their team will help us support and implement. And then the other thing to pick up Catherine's point is this year we will be, well, we've invested quite a significant amount in transitioning from our current IT supplier to a new supplier. That will take place in September, but we're planning to invest £2 million in our network this year, which we very much hope is going to bring us a few steps forward into the modern age.
We look forward to you preparing a debrief for us on the ACRA book, Paul.
There's actually also a new orange book coming up from the Treasury as well this month on risk, so that's also a good read.
I think we'll call a halt to coloured books from here on in.
So I've got one question. So the business case, there's some assumptions around demand management, and that's sort of planned into sort of activity. So if their demand management assumptions don't sort of play out, is there any flexibility in the future to add capacity to the site, and what assurances can you give around that?
So yeah, that's a really good question, and the answer to that is yes, and it's kind of twofold. One, the famous optimism bias that sits in our capital costings at SOC stage is partly to allow for the detailed work we do at outline business case and whether or not the scope of the programme needs to change. And that could be that the demand is higher than forecast when we look at it again. So that's the sort of technical modelling answer. And we've modelled some scenarios in here that says what that would look like in terms of, so if there was a shortfall, what would that mean for the number of beds, for example. The other thing is, yes, when we make our designs, particularly for the Watford site, we will make sure that we keep flexibility for the future, because the new hospital, whatever shape it takes, we hope will be operational by 2028, let's say. We know that we need to plan for 2050, 2060, and what we need in 2028 won't probably be exactly the same as what we need then. So we will make sure that we keep flexibility to expand or change.
Following on from this question about flexibility, is disposing of the land a requirement, or can we keep that as part of the flexibility for planning for future?
So the land disposals obviously contribute to the cost, and the expectation from regulators will be that we're not keeping land and assets that could be released to support the cost of the scheme. So there will be kind of debate and scrutiny and assurance that we keep an appropriate amount of flexibility but not too much. And in the context of obviously a very big national priority on releasing land for housing, I think again there's an expectation that NHS organisations don't kind of hoard land that could be made available for housing. So we will be, we will have to make judgments as we go through this process about how much land to release, how much to retain, and land that is released, the expectation is that any land sale receipts then gets kind of cycled back into the cost of the development. But in the scheme of things, the land sale receipts is relatively small contributor to the total cost of the scheme. So it won't be money that drives this decision.
Up to that, one of the submissions again was from a person appealing for us to look at the interests of younger people in the community. I think it was a young mother, but she was asking specifically what we are doing. So it's interesting to hear you there start to talk about how things might, the planning that you're doing for looking towards 2030, 40, 50, and I rather thought that space might be an entirely different issue by then in terms of what we might have on offer, but I'm just keen to hear a little bit more about what we are doing in terms of the longer term planning as well. I know the emphasis on getting this done, but the longer term, yeah, we're still open to that.
Yeah, I mean the plans, the SOC is based on 20 years worth of modelling. But we know, and we've debated this as a team, it's very hard to model more than 5 or 10 years in advance. So we've really modelled 5 to 10 years and then doubled it. We know that things will change in ways that we can't even anticipate now. And things have changed in the last 2 or 3 years that we didn't necessarily see coming. So the art of this is to keep your buildings as flexible as possible, and then to keep the flexibility to review and change things in the future.
Okay, any more questions?
So there's one thing on this point. We've talked a lot about it today about technology, and actually, my children will access care very differently to my parents access care. So I think there is and we talked about the new model of care and what changes we need to make and how things will look very different in 5 years. We know that stroke care is very different now than it was 5 years ago. So, and we could debate genetics and everything else this afternoon, but we can't at this moment in time. But with the information we have at this time, and I think that's Helen's point, based on our track record of what we've seen in the past. I think the other thing that which we haven't discussed when we did the last meeting, which we've now got obviously, is the equality impact analysis, which and the rights of protected groups, and there is obviously an impact around. We make reference to older people in particular, and as well as talking about what's the future, there is also an older generation who have been used to accessing care in a certain way. But I think one of the things we probably don't talk about enough, and we should also and want to bring to life now, is that there is a lot of work going on around older people now. So it's frailty or otherwise. Frailty is different cohorts. We have obviously a clinical driven tool which is around complex frailty, moderate frailty and mild frail patients, and we're doing a lot in the join up of an integrated care pathways around in GPs all the way through to acute hospitals around how we manage those patients and how they seamlessly access care as they need and preventable as best as we can. Now, ultimately, there will be a position where frail patients who need to go into a hospital, but that they step down as quickly back as they can into the community. And I think I just want to bring out that I recognise that that's an impact that's reflected in here, but it's not something that we're not focusing on, and we're doing a lot now in investment in trying to help identify these patients and also their carers, but also then how they've got much more seamless, joined up care in the community across the entire provider spectrum. So I just didn't want to let that, because we haven't this is the first time obviously we've seen the detailed equalities position, and it is quite a factor in the different options and the different models that we need to be cognizant of and continue to do some work around and delivery around, particularly if we're going to make these demand management assumptions work for the future. It's not just all about technology. So I didn't want to let that go today without us talking about that.
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah. Okay, there is no doubt that this is quite a journey that we're on, but we've already started that journey across the health economy, across the STP. And we've already seen positive changes over the last few years that have already brought benefits to our patients, moved care closer to home. But this is an important and very important milestone in terms of how we go forward from here. So I'm now putting to the board the recommendation that we support option 1. How does the board agree with that? Are we all in favour? Yeah. Any against?
We should take a vote for voting members, I think.
Okay, yeah. Just for voting members? Okay. All positive. None against? Okay, motion carried. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. We now move on to other business. I'm not taking any questions on this at all. That's item closed. We'll move on to item 7 on the agenda, which is the GP Enhanced Framework. Lynn?
Thank you. The board's been asked to delegate authority to the Primary Care Commissioning Committee to approve the GP Enhanced Commissioning Framework for 1920. As a rule, the Primary Care Commissioning Committee always refers requests of over £1 million to board for approval, but on the board all GPs are conflicted, as they will obviously benefit from the Enhanced Commissioning Framework. This is how we provide that would normally be provided in secondary care, blood testing, ear syringing, and a range of services. So the board's been asked, will you agree to give delegated authority to the PCT to sign that off? The reason we're asking for that is that on the Primary Care Commissioning Committee, whilst we have a GP representative from each of the 4 localities, we have 2 external GPs who are not conflicted.
Okay, questions for Lynn? Paul?
Well, I suppose it's a question for Rob as well, if he's still here. Look, from a governance perspective, do we need to delegate it downwards to another committee because board members are conflict, or do we apply the process that we put in place for dealing with the conflicted board, which is we get in additional board members from other areas to help us? Because this is not how we've done. This is not necessarily how we've dealt with this stuff before, I think.
I suppose this one is slightly different because primary care is a public board and it's a delegated function already from NHS England. And obviously NHS England can also be part of that committee if they wish as well. So I understand what you're saying, but we've already made some other decisions, but they weren't in relation to primary care, is my understanding. Rod, if that's correct.
That's correct.
And we have followed this process before with primary care.
We did it several times last year, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
Yeah, so I think that was the main difference. So like this meeting, they are public, their meetings in public, and the delegation functions with NHS England.
Okay, any more questions for Lynn? No, so do we agree the delegation of the decision making to the Primary Care Commissioning Group? All in favour?
Thank
Committees, sorry. Okay. Just before we move on to the back end of the agenda, most of you will perhaps have seen the letter that Rod, I think, circulated on the annual assessment for us, which we were rated good for the 2nd year running. That's based on the indicators of the CCG improvement and assessment framework. One of the comments in the letter that was received from Region was to congratulate the CCG on progress made in 2018-19. I suppose we really must not pat ourselves, but we must recognise the hard work that's gone into this in what's been another tough year in terms of the workload. So Catherine, your executive team, and I think everybody involved in the CCG, number one, should be aware of this and thanked for everything that's produced that. Yes, there are areas for improvement, and those are in the letter as well, so never resting on our laurels, but perhaps next year we can get to excellent. Is it excellent, the next one up, or?
Outstanding.
It's outstanding, is it? Okay. Well, perhaps
we always aspire to that.
We aspire to that. But I think it is an important recognition, really ought to say how great that is for us to achieve that. And I look forward to seeing the rest of the CCGs and where we rank in that. But that's done through hard work and grim determination. I think everybody should recognise how we've got to that point in what was, as I said, was a very, very tough year, but aren't they all? Review of conflicts of interest from managing the meeting. I think we dealt with those okay. Reflection on inequality and diversity in relation to decisions. Not sure there was any.
There was a significant one.
Oh, sorry, yes. Sorry. Okay, thank you for that.
Replay that back. There was a significant qualities and impact assessment. So
that's right, that's just scribbling.
Okay.
Yeah. So, just to
go on, Catherine.
That point. So obviously we have done that. It's been It would normally go through Quality Committee, but actually Quality Committee is a subcommittee of this board anyway. So it came through here because obviously it's an important part of the strategic outline case process. So I think the analysis is there. We've obviously been very cognizant of all of that and the feedback that we've done and the stakeholder feedback that we've had, and also the decisions and that we've come to. So I'd recommend that we've taken cognizance of those as we've gone through the process.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Okay. Risks identified during the meeting. Already identified? Any additional risks?
We didn't really raise it in the meeting, but I guess I would just like to table that as we, not least because it's so hard to pronounce, but as interoperability, yeah, that one. As we spread the sort of the information net wider, the cyber risk gets bigger with that and needs to be managed accordingly with it. So I think at some stage it'd be useful to have Trudy tell us about perhaps how we, as we involve the council and all this stuff, how we're also maintaining cybersecurity at the same time as sharing information more widely.
All right, thank you. Date and time of next meeting is 9 a.m. on the 26th of September in Herts Borough Council's committee room. Thank you, everybody.